Hello guys, and welcome to my new video. I did look at Season 4 healer predictions, and now it's time to look at DPS, especially looking at meta or possible meta changes approaching Season 4, because there is going to be a new Affix Shrouded, there's going to be new old raids introduced, which will have some juicy gear for some of the DPS specs, especially when you consider things like Sanctum of Domination coming back, which has some really interesting weapons and trinkets, specifically for melee DPS, things like rogues, which will, or it can influence the Mythic Plus meta when it comes to Season 4. But a big disclaimer before any of these videos, this is very early on, there hasn't been any or very limited class balancing changes issued for Season 4, with the exception of Destruction Warlocks and Survival Hunters, and we know they're going to be nerfed. So there is going to be, or possibly, new specs or classes coming into the meta, and how that's going to shape up is only going to be determined in the future, because Blizzard could make some more class changes. They could introduce nerfs, buffs in the future, whether it's going to be in a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks time. So keep that in mind. This video is going to be ranking or using a tier list to do my Mythic plus DPS predictions from what we know so far. Before we're going to go into the predictions and looking at the data from Season 3, because data from Season 3 can be applied to Season 4 in a lot of ways, this is the new affix in Season 4 in Mythic Plus. There's going to be a bunch of new dungeons added, and again, for the people who've been playing Shadowlands, they're going to have to get used to new dungeons because only Tazda Vesh is staying. So new dungeons will have different level of complexity. There's going to be different damage patterns. Some of the dungeons are very single target oriented, depending on how you look at it. This could shape the DPS meta. Now, before we look at the tier list that I'm going to kind of propose, we have to be aware of the fact that the new affix is very different from Season 3. In Season 3, you had you had cooldown reduction, and you had Voe. Voe specifically gave you invisibility or stealth, allowed you to do a lot of different skips, and probably a lot of people are going to say without Voe, rogues are gonna probably climb in meta, and I would agree to that extent, and we're gonna talk about it later on. But Shrouded Affix in itself is very simplistic, because at the start of the dungeon you get to pick which secondary stat you want to increase throughout the dungeon. So you get to pick crit, verse, haste, or mastery, and throughout the dungeon, you're going to be killing these infiltrators and these specific mobs, which are going to add additional stacks of that stat bonus. So it's not uncommon to have something like 20 plus extra haste at the end of the dungeon. So classes that specifically scale really well with a singular stat are going to see an increase in their viability in Mythic Plus. On top of that, we don't really know how a lot of these older dungeons are going to scale in terms of high tyrannical keys. There is a high chance that it really high tyrannical keys, defensives, and surviving is going to be very, very important. So when we're looking at DPS classes, we're not only looking at the DPS output, we're looking at survivability and utility. The class has to have everything to be considered meta or to be invited in a lot of these high Mythic Plus push groups. And you might already say that, hey, MadSkillz, why not just stack versatility at the start of the dungeon and get as much versatility as you can, and all of a sudden your survivability is going to be a lot better. Blizzard kind of looked at that, and they nerfed versatility gain from Shrouded Affix by 50%. So it will be likely that a lot of classes might gear versatility through their gear or other means, rings, necks, and all of those things. And when approaching Mythic Plus content, they might pick a stat that is going to help them or increase their DPS. And what you see right now is going to be my prediction tier list for Season 4 in terms of DPS classes. I'm not going to be ranking every single DPS class or spec in terms of, again, I'm looking at classes or specs that are going to be considered as S tier, or I might even change them to meta, because meta can be very engraved. For example, right now, if you're looking at rated.io information, which is real player information in keys 25 and up, Destruction Warlock, Survival Hunter, and Windwalker are the absolute meta right now in Season 3, and you could almost argue that you could drop a Survival Hunter or Windwalker to pick up a second Destruction Warlock. They're that far ahead. We're going to be looking at some of the DPS profiles, and this is a really cool graph made by some of the Reddit users here in terms of the last couple of weeks, in terms of Mythic Plus Warcraft logs. They've been put together, and we're looking at the pure DPS of certain classes. Now, this is looking at pure DPS. In order to make a class S tier or meta, a class needs to have either insane DPS, or it has to have good DPS, utility, and survivability. So you want to have a combo of those to make a class really, really strong in World of Warcraft, especially when it comes to Season 4, because scaling could be a little bit weird with all these older dungeons. So Destruction Warlock is definitely getting a nerf. Survival Hunter is definitely getting a nerf. We know this is going to happen. Now, the Destruction Warlock nerf, we're assuming it's going to do with Reign of Chaos in terms of how it interacts with tier set or 4 set bonus. that means the damage profile of the Destruction Warlock is going to be very, very different. It's no longer going to be infinite damage. You're going to be a lot more reliant on your Infernal and making sure or making use of that Reign of Chaos buff. So, historically speaking, a little history lesson. What made classes really overpowered? Things like in Season 3, Destruction Warlocks, at the start of Shadowlands, in terms of Frost Mages, in BFA, BM Hunters. What made those specs so strong that people would stack and stack and stack these classes? They had infinite damage because they had a certain main ability that would reduce the cooldown of their big DPS cooldown. And you would have this vicious cycle of a class that would previously rely on cooldowns no longer relies on cooldowns because it constantly have those DPS cooldowns rolling because it uses main ability. And Destruction Warlock is a prime example of this. It had infinite damage, it didn't rely on cooldowns, it had a lot of other things, and it made Destruction Warlocks way too strong. They're getting nerfed, that doesn't mean they're going to be deleted. I would honestly still put them in meta or A tier quite easily, high A tier, because not only Destruction Warlocks, again, they're getting like, if we're talking hypothetically, maybe 20% overall nerf, maybe a bit more. That's still not enough to delete Destruction Warlocks. That's how strong they were. The fact that they still have good utility through, again, you look at AoE stun, you're looking at pet utility. If you have your Fel Hunter with Interrupt and Purge, or if you have Imp for Magic Dispel, you are extremely tanky with your Mastery. If you want more survivability, you can stack Verse. Destruction Warlock will still have a lot of damage unless they're going to nerf them even further. They still have a decent amount of utility, Health Stones, Soul Stones, and things like that. Demon or portal skips that you could have in some of these new keys. That is definitely going to be viable. I've already seen quite a few skips in things like Iron Dogs as a Warlock in terms of portals, in terms of Demon Gateways. So there's a lot of things that the Destruction Warlock has without just looking at its damage. But I also think that Warlock has Demonology. You can actually swap for certain weeks, for certain affixes to Demo. And Demo is another very solid spec, another high A tier spec. So I would actually put Warlocks in A tier, possibly S tier or meta tier in terms of my predictions, because as a Warlock you should be able to play at least these specs right now. I think Affliction has been buffed and things like that, but I don't think Affliction is going to be as good as Demo or Destruction in really high Mythic Plus keys. Now, Survival Hunter is also getting nerfed in Season 4, but we have no idea what's happening to them. Historically speaking, Survival Hunter, Blizzard rebalancing Hunters has been pretty much a disaster. They're either going to touch them in such a way that it's not going to affect their damage at all, or it's going to be very, very minor, or they're going to do something that's going to delete this class off the face of World of Warcraft. There's never an in-between. It's either nothing or some crazy change that no one is ever gonna touch Survival. So this is why I'm not gonna rank Survival, because I have no idea what's gonna happen. I would be very, very scared if I was a Survival Hunter enjoyer right now that I only play Survival Hunter, because in my honest opinion it can go either way, and you can either still enjoy Survival in that S tier or A tier or whatever, or it's just going to be something that no one is ever gonna invite. Depends on how Blizzard is gonna approach this. Now, the only spec that is surely going to stay meta or S tier meta from what we know so far, and I think you already know what it is, out of the Destruction Warlock and Survival Hunter, they're going to get nerfed. Windwalker Monk is not getting touched, and it's already meta in Season 3, and it's only going to continue to stay meta in Season 4. So, where's the Windwalker Monk? Right here. We're going to put this as a sure bet for Season 4. You could still place Warlock or Destruction Warlock in S tier, but I'm honestly being somewhat cautious. Windwalker is the only class that's not getting nerfed out of the meta specs in Season 3. Windwalker has been buffed in terms of single target damage. It's no longer viability in tyrannical keys. It has an insane amount of AoE damage. It is cooldown dependent, but it does have a lot of utility through Ring of Peace, which is insane. Disease Dispel in certain dungeons. And you also have that Mystic Touch 5% physical debuff that you apply to mobs. So there's not a lot of things that Windwalker can do well in Mythic Plus, and they also have one advantage. Blizzard is relatively scared to nerf Windwalkers even further because they're not all that amazing in raids. So I do think that Windwalker is a pretty good bet in Season 4 when it comes to being, meta classes, and I don't think Blizzard is going to touch them too much unless they're going to buff all the other specs. I think Windwalker is going to be a safe S tier or meta pick for Season 4. Now, in terms of other classes, I want to talk about Rogues. And I think Rogues, and I'm going to put Sub and Outlaw here, but I honestly don't know which of these classes or specs are going to be the... I definitely think if you're playing Sub right now, Sub is the most popular spec. It is used by most people in high-end Mythic Plus pushing, and I think Sub and Rogues can actually do a decent amount of damage. But the advantage of Rogues is that these Rogue in itself doesn't have to do Warlock damage. It doesn't have to do insane amount of DPS. It doesn't have to be the top DPS spec in the game because it has so much utility. Now, Rogue has fallen out of meta in Season 3 because, quite frankly, Destruction Warlocks, Survival Hunters, and Windwalkers are just all better than Rogues. What's happening in Season 4? In Season 4, first of all, Shroud is going to be needed. Woe is no longer there. I think invisibility skips, the fact that you can use Shroud and everyone can save their DPS potion is a pretty good advantage, especially in certain... There is certain linear keys, but there's also certain like wide open keys like Junkyard and things like that, where you could have some weird routes that you could save a minute or two. And Shroud is going to just climb and climb. On top of the fact that Rogues are getting some of the best items out of the raids in terms of the daggers. The Sylvanas daggers are just insane. Like, some people are still using Sylvanas daggers without being max item level. Like, that's how strong some of these daggers are, and every rogue will want to pick up those daggers, and we'll see how much DPS increase they're going to be. But I think rogues are definitely going to climb because of items they're getting from raid. They can be used in Mythic Plus, and the fact that they have Shroud. Which spec is going to be better, I'm not sure. Outlaw has received a certain buffs in the last couple of weeks, and I think there's going to be certain... It depends on which damage profile you want to have. I don't think Assassination is going to be as good as these two right now. I think if you enjoy Assassination, you're going to keep on playing it, but I don't think it's going to be as good as Sub or Outlaw. And again, there is a lot of good things about being rogue. You're pretty much invincible. You cannot die. You should not die as a rogue because you have so many defensives. You have a lot of these CC kind of utility that you provide in a key that helps your party or prevents your party from dying, like, you know, interrupting mob at the right time, stunning mob at the right time. They have a lot of these utility advantages they provide, and they're always been strong, but in Season 3 their damage is not compared to the top 3 specs, but in Season 4 a lot of the top specs are getting nerfed. So Rogue is definitely making a comeback in my opinion. I think if you're a Rogue enjoyer, you're definitely going to... You're gonna experiment. I think if you just play Sub, I think you should try out Outlaw. I think it will be very interesting. And now I think other specs, again, we have to look at Mage. So this is kind of weird right now because you can see what's happening right now. Historically speaking, Mage and Rogue have been very strong in Mythic Plus because of a bunch of different things that they provide. And they've kind of fallen out in Season 3. Now, you could argue that Fire Mage in Season 3 was still very strong at the Radical Weeks because of really strong single target DPS. You don't only want to have AoE specs, you also want to have someone who can provide decent amount of single target damage. It didn't really make a lot of sense in Season 3 because you just had so much overall damage. But Fire Mage, how do I say? There is certain things that Fire Mage is getting in Season 4. It's getting, you know, gear like from Mechagon in terms of bracers. Bracers, historically speaking, were very strong. We'll have to see how it's going to interact with them in Season 4. I'm not sure if it still works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But this is why I placed Mage a little bit lower than Rogue, because I think Rogue is gaining more from items in Season 4. But Fire Mage, that single target damage, it's very strong. It can, again, if you have a Holy Priest, you can use PI on them. Probably PI is still going to be using Destruction Warlocks, Demonology Warlocks, we'll have to see. But I don't think Mage is going anywhere. I think Mage is still going to be a solid pick. You do have a lot of utility or survivability. You do have things like the int buff. People forget about the int buff. Int buff is actually pretty nice. And you have Bloodlust. Think about this. Hunter, Survival Hunter, might not be meta, and you might be missing a Bloodlust in your key unless you have a Resto Shaman, which I don't think is going to be the case in the highest keys in the world. I think it's still going to be Holy Priest because PI is still very strong. So you're missing that Bloodlust, and Mage or Fire Mage might be the only way to get that Bloodlust. So that's another big deal. I don't think Fire Mage would be ranked as high, or Mage in general would be ranked as high as it is without having Bloodlust. So that's a big consideration. Another classes that I think could climb, and again, I'm having a lot of Copium here, or Hopium, and I'm gonna put Warriors. Now, I don't know which of these Warrior specs is going to be better in terms of scaling, because again, Fury Warrior is better right now in Season 3. But I think Warriors are getting some of the biggest item boosts from raids, especially Sanctum of Domination, because if you're playing a Fury, you might be using JTs plus Gavel. Gavel received a stealth buff a couple of days ago. You'll be using Old Warrior Soul, and I find it very hard to see how, or predict in terms of how this is going to scale with Warriors, with Fury Warriors, with Armed Warriors, and things like that. So that's something in the chat section, but I do think that Warriors in general are getting some really juicy items, and it might be Hopium, but warriors always used to be a kind of like high A tier or A tier spec. When, you know, certain classes used to be S tier, warrior would always be somewhere behind. And I think the similar kind of mentality is going to apply in Season 4. But let me know, guys, if you're a really avid Arms Warrior, let me know what you think of Arms Warriors coming into Season 4. I still think Fury Warrior is going to be better, but I'm going to place Armed Warriors right here because I just don't know enough about scaling for Arms Warriors in terms of the new items that are coming and things like that. Let me know. And in terms of other classes that I think, again, I actually think Frost Decay has always been a very solid spec, and I think there's not enough DPS DKs playing in the game to showcase how good Frost Decay is. I don't know if Frost Decay should actually be A tier, but I'm gonna place it low A tier, and if there was a B tier, probably be high B tier or something along those lines. Frost can provide a lot of damage, and it can, again, if you're playing a Frost Decay, you're probably aware of the fact that you can do a lot of DPS, but the thing is, it's not all about the DPS. If you can provide a lot of DPS, but you don't have a lot of utility, and if you don't have a lot of survivability, you're not the full package. Like, for example, Rogue does not have to be the top DPS at the end of the Mythic Plus ski, as long as they have ethical damage and as long as they do the right things in terms of the utility they provide, they're the MVP of the group. So Frost Decay would have to provide an insane amount of DPS to be considered meta. I don't think Frost Decay is going to be better than a Windwalker. I don't think Frost Decay is going to be better than a Rogue when you take everything into account, but I think as a Frost, in terms of pure DPS numbers, you can absolutely pump. And I think that's also going to be true in Season 4, and I'm including it because a lot of people dismiss Frost Decay. I don't think Unholy is close to Frost Decay in Mythic Plus, I'm not going to include Unholy here, but in terms of the full list, this is what I'm kind of looking at in terms of A tier. I don't think Havoc is going to make an A tier because one of the main reasons to include Havoc is Chaos Brand, 5% magic debuff, and that used to be really strong because you had Destruction Warlock and you had Survival Hunter, and they would benefit from Chaos Brand in a meaningful way. I think if those classes, I think if Destruction and Survival Hunter are falling, I think Havoc is also going to fall to some extent. I think in terms of the meta right now, you can look at Windwalker, you can look at Destruction, or you can look at Windwalker, you can look at Warlock, you can look at Rogue, you can look at Mage, Warrior, Frost Decay at the bottom, or a little bit lower. But how do you make a composition or a group composition that's going to include a lot of things like BL, Balres? You probably most likely will still have a Blood Decay. Blood Decay is still looking very strong in Season 4. I don't think anything's going to change unless they're going to get a nerf. I think you're going to get Blood Decay, you're going to have a Balres, you're going to have or need a Bloodlust. And this is why I think Mage is going to be a pretty good thing. I don't think Frost is as good as Fire. Frost kind of fell off a little bit. I don't want to include it in A tier because I think it would be more in B tier. Frost fell off because people at the start were expecting that, you know, you're going to kite a lot more and the Frost slow is really strong, but the overall damage just wasn't there. And right now in Season 3 to Time Keys, you basically just need a huge amount of DPS. Tanks are not dying because Blood Decays are just far too strong. If Blood Decay wasn't meta or Brewmaster wasn't meta or whatever, if those specs were not as good as they were, or if you need more kind of protection for your tank, DPS meta would probably be different. For example, Balanced Druid is actually one of the worst DPS classes right now, and I think they should absolutely get a buff. This is the DPS kind of note for the last 2 weeks in terms of Mythic Plus. Their DPS is almost tank-like. That's how bad Balanced Druids are in Mythic Plus. They're absolutely insanely bad. Like, they're not that bad in Raid, but they're really bad in Mythic Plus. A lot of people were hoping that Balanced Druid would still be meta, like in Season 3 or whatever, because tanks would need survivability. They had treants and things like that, they had a lot of utility, but that's not the case. You need pure damage, and I think the same kind of thing is gonna be true for Season 4. You need pure damage with Time Keys, but I think defensives or survivability is going to play a bigger part for a lot of the DPS classes, because I'm scared about how older dungeons are scaled. I don't think they're scaled in such a way that Shadowlands dungeons are, so that's something that I'm a little bit scared. I don't think a lot of these specs are making a comeback into A or S tier. This is my prediction. I think Marksmanship Hunter, you could actually place Marksmanship Hunter something like really low A tier or somewhere in B tier, because Marksmanship is one of those specs that can, to some extent, you can view it as one of the best low-key specs, because they have so much burst, and in low keys, mobs die really quickly, and Marksmanship can do really, really good damage. But like many of the hunters in this list, they suffer from the biggest problem of being somewhat squishy. You don't have a lot of defensives, and a healer has to pay attention to you, and a dead DPS has no DPS. So unless hunters are getting some substantial survivability increases in Season 4, which they're not, you can get versatility buff, but you have to remember the versatility buff in Mythic Plus is 50%. You have to pay a 50% penalty versus getting something like crit or haste or whatever. So that's something to consider. A lot of these classes also have to look whether verse is going to be their main stat or how they can survive mechanics. I don't want to ramble on too much. This video has been insanely long. I don't want you to be angry if I didn't include a certain spec. In terms of the pure DPS profiles that you're looking right now, what spec should get a certain amount of DPS boost? I think Balanced Druid should get buffed. I think Shadow Priest could get a buff. Mages, I think Fire Mages are going to do quite well. Warlocks are getting nerfed, so they're going to, this is Season 3 by the way. Windwalkers are going to be probably the top DPS right now. If you're looking at Season 4 and we're expecting a sizable nerf to Survival Hunters, which we don't know, Marksmanship does insanely well. But in really, really high keys, it suffers from survivability. Demonology, like again, it's a good time to be a Warlock, Rogue, Mage, and then maybe a Warrior, maybe a Frost DK. But I think the old kind of meta is coming back. Or to some extent, an old kind of meta. So that's something to consider. Again, this is my prediction videos. Everything could be wrong tomorrow or in a week when Blizzard decides to buff all the other specs outside of Windwalker, and all of a sudden everyone's going to be S tier. Who knows, guys? But this is my prediction. I can tell you right now, if nothing changes, if we go into Season 4 the way it is, Windwalker is going to be a pretty good class to play, or a good bet if you want to play that flavor of the month. Let me know how you feel about this video. And again, I am probably in Spain right now because this is a scheduled video. It might not have been edited in the way that I would have liked. It was somewhat rushed. Let me know if I made any mistakes, and I'll see you in my next guide.